Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're doing what is probably the single most requested and anticipated video for my channel, a classes tier list. I am going to be going over every single class in detail, talking about what the main features of that class are, as in what draws you to play that class, and how powerful those features are, and how that power level stacks up against the other classes. I'll be honest, I had somewhat hesitated to do this video at all, because I think it's very easy for it to become too prescriptive and say, this is the class that you should play when you're doing your honor mode runs, and that's absolutely not my goal, so I really want to be very clear up front that the best character to play is the one that you want to play. Optimization is a tool, and you should use it to enable you to have the most fun that you are going to have. If there's a class that you want to play, just go ahead and play it. There are no non-viable classes in Dungeons & Dragons or in Baldur's Gate 3. In fact, the game is phenomenally well balanced in that sense, which I know is going to make people mad in the comments. But basically, all of these classes are viable, and so do not let me stop you from playing the class that you want to play. However, I think we can use a tier list as a useful jumping off point to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of each class, how they fit into a party, and what in particular draws you to play that class, and so that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to divide this video into 4 parts, I think. At least that's the current plan. In today's part, I'm going to be talking about the 12 classes and their strength as single-classed, mono-classed versions of themselves, with no multi-classing. So these characters are going to be how strong are the classes just at core when you just take 12 levels of those classes. Next, I will be going through and talking about how they fit into multi-class builds. Then I will go through and rate each of the subclasses as monoclasses, and then finally we'll go through and rate each of the subclasses as multi-class builds. At least that is the current plan. If you would like to see me approach this in a different way, definitely don't hesitate to let me know in the comments. I'll be making 3 balance assumptions about the classes as I go through and rate them. One, I'm rating these for honor mode. I think that makes the most sense in terms of putting together a tier list, because that's the mode that you really need to make specific balancing choices, since you can't just reload a save if something goes wrong. 2, I will be assuming that you are not abusing any bugs in your playthrough. And 3, I'll be assuming that you aren't long resting after every single fight, and so whether a class has to rest frequently will come up in the analysis. I will also be rating these characters on 2 different metrics, both on the raw power level that the character brings to the table and on the versatility that it brings to the table, as in how easy is it to fit it into a party of various other classes, and how many different roles can it fill, and how many different ways can you build it. Therefore, characters or classes that rely on specific item combinations or rely on or only can fill one role in a party will score somewhat lower. To that end, let's talk about what these tiers actually mean. In S tier, I'm placing characters that are both phenomenally powerful and extremely versatile, so they bring top-tier raw power to the table, but also can be built in a variety of ways, fit easily into any party, and usually don't have specific item requirements, so they aren't going to conflict with what your other characters need to function. In general, you can replace a random character in a party with one of the S tier classes, and your party will improve, because it will slot seamlessly into what your party is doing and bring an extremely high amount of power to the table. In A tier, I have characters that are one but not the other. So either they are extremely versatile and can fit into any party and fill basically any role, or they're extremely powerful in whatever their more linear strategy might be. So they may only do one thing, but they do that thing so darn well that they're always worth bringing along. In B tier, I have characters that are probably a little more build constrained and don't quite have the top tier power level of the A tier characters, but they're still just going to be excellent and of course are going to work very well in a party. And in C tier, I have characters that are more constrained and less powerful than the other characters. As in, these characters are going to only be able to fill one role in your party, one or two roles within your party, and they just won't fill that role quite as well as another class would. In D tier, well, there are no classes that fall into D tier. That's just there as a rhetorical device, because every class in Baldur's Gate is viable. I would reserve it for non-viable characters, but I really want to visually show you that there are no non-viable characters in Baldur's Gate 3. So, let's jump in and talk about the classes, beginning with Barbarian. So what do Barbarians get that makes them cool, powerful, and unique? Well, Barbarians basically get 4 or sort of 5 main things, as well as a host of smaller things, but these are the 5 main ones. 1, they get more hit points than any other character, making them more survivable. Survivability is pretty important on Honor Mode, because if things are going wrong in a fight, you have that much more threshold before your party loses effectiveness. Remember that a character at 1 hit point fights exactly as effectively as a character at 100 hit points. Barbarians just having more hit points just gives you more threshold before your party actually loses effectiveness. Also, thanks to their high hit points and fast movement and additional ways to mitigate damage, Barbarians are very good at getting away from fights. So if the fight starts to go wrong, a Barbarian is a great way to actually run away and live to fight another day, which can be very important if your Honor Mode run has a fight that starts to go badly. 2, Barbarians get Rage. Rage gives them more damage per attack than other characters because it gives them additional damage, as well as some form of damage mitigation. Resistance to physical damage by default, and additional resistances based on your subclass. You also get other cool effects depending on what subclass you select. Rage is an incredibly powerful ability, but does have 2 major downsides. 1, it can only be activated in combat and requires a bonus action, so it does eat some of your action economy. And 2, it requires a charge, and those charges only refresh on long rest, and you don't get that many of them as you level up in Barbarian. So you are... by 12th level Barbarian, you'll have 5, which will be plenty, but for most of the game, Barbarians are going to be somewhat long rest constrained, because the number of times they can rage is going to be fewer than the number of encounters you want to take in a day. This means that Barbarians are, as a martial character, reliant on long rests, which is something that most martial characters don't rely on at all. Most martial characters benefit from not using resources during the day, whereas Barbarians do actually need a resource that they have to sleep to get back. 3, Barbarians get Reckless Attack, which is an extremely powerful ability that gives you advantage on all your attacks. This means that you are going to be doing, on average, more damage than any other melee character by default, turn after turn after turn. However, it gives enemies advantage on attacks against you. This sounds like a major downside, but actually is in some ways an upside, because enemies having advantage on attacks against you makes them more likely to target you. Enemies in Baldur's Gate, the AI in Baldur's Gate, prioritizes its targeting based on how easy it is for it to land an attack, in part. There are other factors, but that's one of them. Barbarians, thanks to their high survivability and damage mitigation from rage, are almost always the character you would rather have an enemy attack. So having an inbuilt mechanic that causes enemies to target a Barbarian is a huge advantage. Remember, if you don't want your Barbarian targeted because they're low health or whatever, you don't have to activate Reckless Attack. But if you want to land a hit that would otherwise miss, or if you want enemies to target your Barbarian, which you often do, Reckless Attack makes that more likely to happen while giving you an incredible increase to your damage dealing capacity. This is an extremely powerful ability and one of the few ways to manipulate enemy aggro in the game, effectively by changing your AC at will during a fight, causing enemies to change what they're targeting and forcing them to target your tank. Barbarians, of course, are going to be your team's tank, insofar as that's a thing in Dungeons & Dragons, and so having enemies target them by preference and the ability to force enemies to target them by preference is extremely powerful. So Reckless Attack is actually good coming and going, both increasing your damage and causing enemy attacks to target the character you want them to target. Next, Barbarians get Fast Movement, which is extremely powerful for any melee character. It means they are more likely to be fighting the character you want them to fight. And finally, Barbarians get the often overlooked Feral Instinct, an ability they get at level 7 that gives them +3 to Initiative and the immunity to Surprise. This is extremely powerful. It's basically 3/5 of the Alert feat, which is hands down the best feat in the game, and is going to make your Honor Mode playthrough much smoother. If your party wins Initiative, you can also mix and match your turns between them if all of your party wins Initiative. And so having a melee character who is strength-based, but still has very good initiative, means that your your Barbarian will not be holding your party back from doing cool initiative-based combos, and of course will win initiative at the start of combat. Combined with their high damage, thanks to Rage and Reckless Attack, this makes them very likely to remove an enemy from combat immediately, or at least be fighting the enemy that you want them to fight, and is extremely powerful. You can also think of this basically as removing a feat tax that you would otherwise have to pay for most martial characters. A character like a Paladin or a fighter is very likely to want to take alert so that they can keep up with the very high initiatives enemies have, especially in Act 3. And because winning initiative is so critical to honor mode, Barbarians don't have to do that. So where a fighter gets 4 feats over their career, you can basically think of Barbarians as getting 3 3/5 of a feat over the course of their levels. And that is already pretty good and catches them up a lot to fighters in terms of feat access, which are one of the more powerful resources in the game. So the strengths of Barbarians are easy positioning, thanks to their fast movement, very high survivability and damage mitigation, thanks to Rage and their high health, and very high damage, thanks to Reckless Attack and Rage, combining to make a character that is a heavy bruiser that brings a lot of damage and damage mitigation to the table for your team. Barbarians basically can fill 2 possible build roles when built as a level 12 Barbarian, and as a reminder, we are talking about mono-class Barbarians here. Either a throwing weapon Barbarian as a ranged DPS, or a melee bruiser. For a mono-class Barbarian, throwing weapons, despite being incredibly broken in Baldur's Gate, are less powerful, because they require you to take Berserker Barbarian and they use your bonus action. You have to spend 1 bonus action raging, so you miss an attack there, and you don't get access to Thief Rogue, so you can't get the additional bonus action that most of those throwing builds use. This means that throwing builds for a mono-class Barbarian are not that powerful. Even though throwing weapons are super broken in Baldur's Gate, and Tavern Brawler is super broken, for a mono-class Barbarian, that's not a huge power spike. On the other hand, they make excellent melee bruisers, but that's basically all they do. They're going to go hit an enemy for high damage and lock them down, and they will tank a reasonable amount, but that is the only thing that they can do, and so they're not particularly versatile as a character. So they score, I would say, fairly high on power level, but fairly low on versatility, with really only 1 or sort of 2 viable build paths for Barbarians. Things also get a little worse for them when you consider their item usage. Barbarians have some of the more constrained item requirements in the game. They're competing with a bunch of other characters for the very valuable medium armors. The medium armors that don't have dexterity caps are some of the more contested items in the game because they're good on basically everybody. And so a Barbarian is going to want one of these items, meaning that they're going to conflict in that case. They also, like other strength-based characters, benefit extremely heavily from drinking strength potions every day, the strength elixirs, but if you have multiple characters drinking strength elixirs every day, that can become a big pain in the butt because you have to buy several of those. You end up having to like respec your characters over and over again, and it also starts to feel pretty bad if your entire party is chugging lots of strength elixirs. The requirement to drink strength elixirs definitely does hold them back. They also require a solid 2-handed weapon, and luckily there are enough of these that they can use a number of different weapons without too many issues, but the fact that they want stat items and want one of the better armor types in the game does mean that they are likely to conflict for items with other characters in your party, and that constrains the parties that they can easily go into. Combined, so altogether, Barbarians give you a reasonably high amount of power level, in fact a very high amount of power level, but are quite constrained in their versatility, and so I'm going to place them in B tier. This, of course, is not an indictment of Barbarians. It's still an excellent class that will fit very well into your honor mode party, but overall they are only going to fill the one role that they're there to fill, and they fill that role extremely well, don't get me wrong, but with not quite the same extraordinary power spikes that some of the other classes we'll talk about shortly bring to the table. Bards. So what do bards bring to the table? Well, the real question is, what do they not bring to the table? Bards are certainly the most versatile class in Baldur's Gate 3, bringing basically everything. You can build a bard as a ranged damage dealer, as a melee damage dealer, as a support spellcaster, as an offensive spellcaster, as a mix of all of the above. Bards are incredibly versatile and also incredibly strong, so it won't become as much surprise where we're going to put it. But let's talk about what they actually do. Bards get access to every single skill in the game, and having great access to all the charisma skills and easy access to skill expertise means that a bard is the best character to be your party face and give you access to all of the dialogue skills that you all of the dialogue options that will make your honor mode run significantly easier, as well as all the dialogue options that give you permanent bonuses, which are, of course, an incredibly powerful boost to your honor mode run. They also, because they get all the knowledge skills in addition to all the charisma skills, get to make all of the knowledge checks that you have to make during conversations, and have access to insight and perception as well. Just having all of the skills, and with Jack of all trades, their skill bonuses will be good even if you don't invest in them. Bards are going to fix any holes that you have in your party's skill setup, while also solving all of your conversations all by themselves. In Baldur's Gate 3, it's very important that your main party face have every skill that you use in dialogue, so all the charisma skills that you intend to use and all the knowledge skills, because those checks are almost the intelligence skills, those checks are almost always only made in dialogue on the same character, because your party members can't weigh in on dialogue checks, so you need all those skills on the same character to make those checks. Bard is by far the easiest way to do that. Bards also, if that wasn't enough, give you an extra short rest every day, which is incredibly powerful when you're trying to sustain through various fights. It gives you back the resources that refresh on a short rest, as well as a bunch of extra HP, and so just by virtue of having Song of Rest, your whole party gets a ton of extra sustainability. They also get easy access to skill expertise, and through their subclasses get access to tons of damage and versatility. Through magical secrets, they get access to every good spell in the game, and so bards can basically do it all. They also get access to a lot of raw power level. Swords bards are probably the highest damage dealer in the game, if optimized for ranged damage, but also really good for melee damage, and give you the easiest access in the game to the most broken item combos in the game, involving Arcane Acuity and the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, allowing you to stack up your DCs to massive levels and force enemies to fail saves. Even if you're not abusing that, though, those item combos, though, bards give you access to all the best control spells, a lot of the best damage, excellent skill access, all of the most important spells like Counterspell and Haste and so on you can grab through magical secrets, as well as having a bunch of offensive and defensive options in their spell selection, as well as in their class features. Through Bardic Inspiration, you're more likely to pass skill checks, you're also more likely to pass important attack rolls and so on, and if you're a lore bard, of course, enemies are less likely to hit you, using your reactions very well. Bards also just use their resources really well. They have great uses for action, bonus action, movement, and concentration. Because they have such powerful spells, they are going to be always one of the classes that is always using all 5 resources available to a character every turn of combat. Every turn, character has access to action, bonus action, reaction, movement, and concentration. Those are the 5 action resources that you can use, and it is a rare turn of combat in which a bard isn't using all of those to maximum effect. Furthermore, there is basically no specific item requirement for bards. While they do use some of the most powerful items in the game, they don't need any specific items in order to be as good as possible. You can build them with light armor and a shield just fine, depending on your racial selection, and that will solve all the problems of lore bards just by picking a race that gives you light armor and shield, and then your bard will have totally reasonable AC. They get excellent defensive options thanks to Counterspell and the other defensive options. Basically, the only thing that bards don't do is summon creatures. But other than that, there is basically no hole in your party that you cannot fill with a bard. Just an incredible class that will allow you to bring anything to the table. Top tier both in versatility and in power level. And there's just no way that you can rate a bard other than S tier. I could continue to talk about exactly what they bring thing, but basically bards give you excellent skill access, the best spell access in the game, some of the highest damage in the game, depending on which subclass you take, and also just fill any possible role in your party extremely well. No party won't be improved by having a bard S tier character. Clerics. Clerics are, I think, a somewhat misunderstood class because people often think of them purely as support characters, but in fact they're much more than that. Clerics can fill many roles in your party, including tank, damage dealer, control spellcaster, or indeed support, all extremely well, depending especially on what domain you pick, but also just in general based on what spells you prepare. They are a little less versatile than bards, who can often fill all of those roles at once, but whereas clerics more often have to pick, but you can very easily slot a cleric into any party and have them fill a role that you need, and that will be an incredibly powerful addition to your party. Clerics also get access to some of the more broken mechanics in the game, with Radiant Orb stacking through easy access to Radiant damage through Spirit Guardians, as well as the extremely powerful buff on heal items that apply Blade Ward and Bless to allies when you heal them. Clerics get the best access to those items, and that's one of the most powerful strategies in the game. Just taking half damage on your entire party is of course great for Honor Mode for obvious reasons, and clerics make it very easy to apply those buffs, so they get one of the more broken strategies in the game right out of the box. Clerics also, by default, are just very strong. Bless is a great spell. Command is probably one of the best spells in the game. Guidance is a top-tier spell. While you can get it from an item, it's great to have it on 2 characters, and so just having it on a cleric is incredibly powerful. Guidance is one of the best, maybe the single best spell in the game, only held back by the fact that you can get it on an item, but just having access to it on your character is excellent. And so even though clerics don't actually bring a lot of skills to the table themselves, the addition of guidance to your party makes your party as a whole much better at passing skill checks, and so clerics actually also help a lot with skills. The main downside of clerics is that they are long rest dependent, and they're very long rest dependent. Unlike sorcerers or wizards, they don't have any way to recover their spell slots, and they burn through spell slots pretty quickly because so many of their spells are so powerful. Obviously, that's a good thing that their spells are so powerful, but it means that you want to use them regularly in combat, and if you're casting Command or Bless and Spiritual Weapon or Spirit Guardians and Spiritual Weapon regularly in combat, you're going to be using spell slots relatively quickly compared to other characters and without a way to get them back. That being said, clerics are just so powerful that even if they are a slight drain on your resting resources, it is wildly better to have a cleric than not to have a cleric in your party. The addition of so much control, so many broken mechanics, as well as just being a powerful and versatile tank and melee character. Clerics can get great ACs with medium armor and shield access, or heavy armor access, and you can choose your cleric subclass and therefore what armor you're going to put them in while knowing what the rest of your party is going to be. They don't really compete for armor pieces with the other party members. You can decide, if another party member needs a good medium armor, you can just take one of the clerics that has heavy armor and use heavy armor on your cleric, and so they'll always have reasonable AC even when competing with other party members for items. The items that are really good for clerics, like the healing items, also are not ones that other characters are going to want, so they don't really compete for items at all with the other members of your party. The only one that you are going to run into some conflict on is the spell DC increasing items and shields, but in general, your cleric is not going to be a drain on your party's resources in any way, and is going to improve your party drastically simply by existing. Clerics also get some of the most powerful and interesting domain abilities in the game, and they get them super early, including, of course, Tempest Domain's broken damage. That's another broken mechanic that clerics get access to. When combined with the wet condition, maximizing lightning damage is incredibly powerful, and even not as part of a multi-class is still just ridiculously strong with Call Lightning or whatever, and that Tempest Cleric gives you easy access to that. Light Cleric is one of the hardest characters in the game to attack because of their reaction defenses, and clerics also can mix and match what spell access they have based on what your party is by taking the right domain. If you don't have a Druid, you can take a Nature Cleric to get some of the best Druid spells. You can get some of the best control spells as well as damage spells in the game by taking Light or Tempest. And so on. War Clerics are also decent melee fighters, although 12 levels of War Cleric is going to leave you behind in terms of melee combat compared to other characters. Nature Cleric is probably your better bet for melee damage, just using Shillelagh if you want to do a melee damage cleric, but damage is one of the melee damage is one of the roles clerics don't really fill, but luckily they fill every other role in your party extraordinarily well. Clerics bring an incredible amount of power to the table and can fill basically any role in the party. They don't cost you anything in terms of item access or taxes or any kind of tax on your party's resources. The only thing that you will need with a cleric is possibly slightly more frequent long rests, but I don't think that's enough to bump them out of S tier. Clerics I just think are excellent and belong in basically every party. You will never go wrong with a cleric, and if you want a little more power, you can always bring some of the more broken mechanics that clerics give you very easy access to. Druids. Druids basically bring 4 things to the table. 1, they're full spellcasters, getting the full array of damage, support, and utility spells and control spells that other spellcasters get. Obviously, any character that's a full spellcaster is going to be extremely powerful in terms of versatility, especially with Baldur's Gate's rule that you can swap your prepared spells around outside of combat. This will allow you to react to any situation with the best spell for that situation, and of course that's incredibly strong. 2, they have multiple health bars, whether through wild shaping or through the Spore Druid shield. They get a lot of extra just raw HP compared to other spellcasters and even compared to other characters in general. That HP is somewhat mitigated by the low AC of the wild shape forms, so you're more like you will take more damage even though you have the ability to take more damage, but in general druids are extremely tanky and sustainable in combat and will give you a lot of, much like barbarians, give you the ability to get out of bad combats through raw HP while also just maintaining a ton of additional presence in combat because they're much less likely to die. 3, they make decent melee combatants through the aforementioned wild shape forms and Spore Druid damage. And 4, they get some of the best access to summons in the game. Summons are an incredibly powerful strategy in Baldur's Gate, and druids get by far the best of the summon spells with Summon Woodland Being. They also get the other best summon spell with Conjure Elemental, so they get some of the best summon access very, very easily, and just in general, at high levels, druid spells are some of the best. If you look at my spell tier list, you will notice that druids have very few of the S and A tier spells at levels 1 through 3, but as you creep up in levels, more and more of the best spells in the game become druid spells. So if you're going for a monoclassed character, in the later half of the game, your druid is going to start getting really good spell access where some of your other spellcasters are starting to suffer a little bit. However, druids do have a couple downsides. One, they are pretty resource dependent, with their additional health bars being on short rest. They're not as bad as barbarians, whose resource comes back on a long rest, because they get wild shape charges back on a short rest, but definitely they do need to rest frequently, and of course, they need both short rest and long rest resources, which can make it hard to plan a party around them, since often you'll want to plan your party around needing either short rests or long rests, and so that you can sort of maximize your resting utility. Druids need both, which makes it a little more complicated. And 2, in terms of just raw power level of their spells, they don't get some of the best spells in the game, and the best spells that they do get, they get a little bit later on, so they're going to struggle a little bit in the early game compared to some of the other characters. Their wild shape forms and melee damage also will fall off in the later game, and Spore Druids, of course, they will lose their shields, especially without the power of multiclassing to help protect them. They are going to be a little bit less defensible than other spellcasters or other characters because they have medium armor access, so they're going to be taking damage and losing their wild shape forms and shields frequently. Overall, druids bring a ton to the table, though, because just any full spellcaster is always going to be incredibly powerful, and the late game potential of druids is incredibly strong, giving you access to versatile and powerful spells, as well as a bunch of other strategies. Overall, though, I think because a monoclass druid's sort of melee damage strategy is a little less powerful than a melee damage dealer, and their spell casting takes a while to catch up to the other spellcasters, I'm going to say that they are an A tier character because they bring a tremendous amount of versatility to the table, but are slightly constrained in terms of raw power level compared to other characters. Again, I want to emphasize that the differences between these tiers are very, very small. These margins are razor thin, and so placing Druid in A tier does not make it wildly different in power level than the other spellcasters, but I think just the fact that it takes a little bit longer to come online, you don't get command at level 1, so you aren't going to be immediately winning fights the way for your team the way a Cleric is, and you don't get access to some of the very best spells in the game, like Counterspell, or Hunger of Hadar, and so on, the way Bard does. So you are going to struggle a little bit compared to the other main spellcasters as a main spellcaster. Again, totally viable main spellcaster and an excellent character overall that can fill any role in the party. It's also notable, incidentally, as being the only wisdom-based character that actually gets perception as a skill, so it's your best way to get perception in a party, and perception is an incredibly important skill to have, but otherwise it doesn't give you a lot of important skill access. Survival is useless, and druids don't really get any other skills available to them, so you are going to need other party members to cover your skills. Importantly, of course, druids do not conflict, wild shape focused druids do not conflict basically at all for items with other party members, but any druid that is staying in human form, or humanoid form, which is the more powerful way in general to play druids, is to play them just as pure spellcasters and use your wild shapes for additional health bars and backup rather than as a main strategy, is going to conflict with your other spellcasters like clerics for the spellcasting gear, as well as for medium armor, and so they are going to be a little more item constrained than other party members unless you're focusing them purely on wild shapes. If you are focusing them purely on wild shapes, they won't do quite as good of damage as a monk or barbarian or whatever would, and so I recommend focusing them more as spellcasters. Overall as, or possibly even more versatile than the two S-tier classes so far, but slightly less raw power, especially because some of the most broken mechanics that druids have access to, like for example Moonbeam not triggering Sanctuary, or not counting as breaking Sanctuary, are clearly bugs, and so if we're considering these characters in their balance for not abusing bugs, you can't consider that balance, so they have less access to broken mechanics than the S-tier classes as well. Fighters. Fighters seem simple at first glance, and I think people often overlook them because they are sort of the simple and default character. However, there's actually a lot of complexity to fighters that makes them very interesting. Fighters are, for a martial character, extremely versatile, so obviously they aren't going to have as many different options as a character with spells. You know, just numerically they won't have as many different buttons to push as a spellcaster. But a fighter, in terms of martial characters, can fill any role. You can be a range damage dealer, a melee damage dealer, a tank, a support, a lockdown character using Sentinel. Fighters can do it all. Because they get access to so many different feats, you can gear your fighter for whatever your party needs, and they will do very well at that thing as well. Fighters also get the single most powerful ability in the game, Action Surge, which just gives them a whole extra turn, which is obviously ridiculously strong, and they also get, at level 11, improved extra attack, making them one of the only characters alongside druids who can attack 3 times in one turn, with a fully powered main hand attack. And that means that they will be one of the highest late-game damage dealers in the game as well. Getting to that point, your fighters will still be very strong, because their subclass abilities are all very good, and you can build your character for what your party needs quite easily. It's also especially worth noting that Eldritch Knight on Honor Mode is probably the single easiest character to play Honor Mode with. Not necessarily the strongest, but the probably the easiest, because the combination of just having high hit points and shield and long strider and so on gives your party just everything that they need all at once for your, even if you make a bunch of mistakes, your Eldritch Knight will still have your back. So Fighter altogether is both versatile in terms of martial characters and very powerful and just very hard to screw up, which is really important for Honor mode. You can put your Fighter in a bad situation and they'll make it through it. You can rely on your Fighter to take down an important enemy, and they will do it. They also get Indomitable, one of the better class features in the game, which means if they get hit by a dangerous saving throw effect, you can re-roll that save, making them surprisingly good at resisting enemy effects, which is very important, of course. The main downside of fighters is that they are very gear dependent. They are going to need very specific items. Much like barbarians and the other strength characters, they benefit very heavily from drinking potions every day, which is a real downside, and they're going to compete for the good weapons with your other party members, of course. Good weapons, good armor, good shields, depending on what you have them geared in. Though the sheer versatility of fighter does make them less gear constrained than other characters, because if you have another character that would want that gear, you can just build your fighter in a way where they don't need it. Like if you have another heavy armor user, you can build your fighter as an archer, as a ranged damage dealer, put them in medium armor and use their dexterity, and that'll be fine. If you have another character that wants medium armor, your fighter can wear heavy armor, and so on. And so you get to make the choice of what items your fighter is going to need at the beginning, unlike some other characters which basically always need the same items. On the other hand, all fighters do is hit things, and there is sort of a cap to how good you can be at hitting things based simply on just how much damage do you do when you hit things. And the answer is that fighters do a lot of damage, but not as much damage as some of the other damage dealers that we'll talk about later. They don't have the damage steroid mechanic of barbarians with rage, and they don't have the paladin smites, or rogue sneak attack, and so on, and so they aren't going to have quite as much raw damage as other purely damage-focused classes. So while you can build your fighter to do anything, they will be just a little bit behind some of the other more specifically focused classes. Again, these differences are very small, but that is enough to make me put fighters in A tier rather than S tier, because they are the most versatile martial class, and they're very, very good at what they do, but not so good that they are going to be the best at what they do anytime they turn their hand to it, whereas like a bard or a cleric is going to be the best at what they do and can do anything. Monks. So what do monks do? Well, they move fast, they hit really hard, and they stun. And that's what monks do. Monks do exactly 3 things, and they do those 3 things incredibly well. Moving really fast is very powerful because it means you're always going to be hitting the right enemy, and also as a squishy glass cannon melee character, being able to move in, attack, and then move out of retaliation range of enemies using your additional dashes or just your very high movement speed is very powerful. Monks hit extremely hard thanks to Flurry of Blows and thanks to the broken nature of Tavern Brawler in Baldur's Gate 3. It's worth mentioning that any character that can abuse Tavern Brawler, which is an inherently broken feat, is very powerful, and monks are of course the best at that because it's based on unarmed attacks. Tavern Brawler, as implemented in Baldur's Gate 3, breaks a fundamental balance rule of Dungeons & Dragons called bounded accuracy, which is the concept that you should never have too easy or too hard a time landing your attacks. Bounded accuracy basically means that the way that characters get additional to hit chance or additional attribute points or whatever should never exceed the defenses that enemies are getting by so much that you're hitting too frequently. Usually between 40 and 75% is where your hit chances should fall. But because Tavern Brawler lets you double your strength bonus when added to attacks, it completely breaks that rule, meaning that monks will have like 99% accuracy on all their attacks throughout most of the game as soon as they get access to Tavern Brawler at level 4. That's obviously ridiculously powerful, and so monks have the single strongest linear strategy in the game of never missing, doing tons of damage, and stunning enemies frequently. Obviously, stun is an incredibly powerful condition, which means that you're able to eliminate just about every enemy in the game. There's very few that are immune to stun from acting. at the beginning of combat, and then you will never miss your attacks. You will continuously hit them for more damage than you should probably be doing. And so monks just have this ridiculously powerful linear strategy. However, monks do only that thing. There's basically only one way to build a monoclass monk. You have to get Tavern Brawler at level 4, and you have to use one-handed attacks and so on. And if you do that build, then monks are incredibly multi-attribute dependent, which makes them even more build constrained. Multi-attribute dependent, or MAD, is the concept that this character needs to have high points in lots of different base attributes, and monks are one of the worst offenders for this because they need strength, they need dexterity, they need constitution, and they need wisdom all at once. A Tavern Brawler monk has to have as much strength as possible. You need dexterity because otherwise your initiative won't be good, and if you don't win initiative, then stunning people is much, much less powerful, and of course you need the AC as well. You need constitution because you are a melee character and you need good HP, and you need wisdom because it increases your AC and your damage for various monk abilities and so on. So monks need 4 of the 6 attributes, and they need them all as high as possible, which means that they are extremely greedy for strength elixirs, for stat items like the Gloves of Dexterity, and therefore are going to impact what the rest of your party can do a lot. And once you have optimally built your monk in basically the only build path that monks have, you are going to still have some combats where what your monk wants to do is too dangerous to do. Even though they are extremely good at what they do, and they are, and I need to emphasize this, the best at what they do, of just hitting things, dealing damage, and stunning. That thing is sometimes not what you need, because sometimes the enemies are too far away for you to get to, or if you went there, it would put your monk in a dangerous position. And monks are quite squishy, having only moderate HP gain and often much lower AC than other melee characters because they're forced to be unarmored to get their fast movement. And so in situations where your fast movement doesn't get you out of trouble, you can get in a lot of trouble. Monks are therefore, I think, one of the most powerful characters in the game, but also one of the hardest to play in terms of positioning in Baldur's Gate. And it can be very easy to end an honor mode run with a bad turn with your monk by putting them in the wrong place and getting them killed, thanks to their extremely dangerous positioning. Also remember that, or their extremely low defensive stats, which makes their positioning very dangerous if you get it wrong. Also remember that for a monoclassed monk, you are looking at less damage than you are for a multiclassed monk. I know I've been criticizing monks, and I'm sure that many people have taken to the comments to express their disdain for that opinion. But you are probably thinking of multi-class monks with Thief Rogue, which get the additional bonus action dashes for free and do additional Flurry of Blows with their bonus action. And for a monoclass monk, you don't have those options, which makes you much both less damaging because you don't have the additional bonus action, but also much less survivable in general because you don't have the additional bonus action to get out of the way and have to actually spend key points on your bonus action dashes. That means that monks, while being extremely powerful in their linear strategy, what they are trying to do is really, really good, and they're really, really good at it. When they can't do that, they are a liability, and they require a lot of input from your party in order to operate at maximum efficiency. A monk is going to need a lot of buffs in order to not die. They will probably absorb a decent amount of healing insofar as healing is something that you're doing, which is not that often in Baldur's Gate, but definitely something that you need. They also burn through resources, and so will require short rests very frequently because they use their key points very, very fast. And so monks are going to put a lot of pressure on how you build your party, despite being incredibly strong. So because of the very constrained build, the fact that they sort of only do one thing and also put pressure on the rest of your party to support that thing, and while the linear strategy is ridiculously strong, it is sometimes one that they can't execute. I'm going to put monks in B tier. Still obviously an incredible class, and the thing that they do really, really well, and it is a very good thing to do. Monks are almost certainly, in terms of raw power, one of the top tier classes in the game, but for a monoclassed character, they really do constrain your party a little bit, and so I think B tier is the right place for monks. Paladin. Paladin at first glance actually seems somewhat similar to Monk. They have an extremely powerful linear strategy, which is to hit things with smite attacks and do massive damage. However, I think that Paladins actually have a few more options than it might seem at first glance. So what do Paladins get? Well, first off, they get smite attacks, and you could probably stop the analysis there because that's the main thing that they do, but we're of course going to go deeper. Smite attacks let you trade your spell slots for massive burst damage, meaning that Paladins are some of the highest burst damage attackers in the game, maybe the highest, and are going to do enormous amounts of damage, especially on a critical hit. It's very easy to guarantee critical hits in this game, thanks to easy sources of advantage and of course guaranteed critical hits, and so Paladins are going to very regularly be able to output the massive amounts of damage that they do quite reliably, destroying your enemies very, very quickly. Paladins also, in addition to that very powerful linear strategy of hit things really, really hard in melee with high burst damage, get a few additional options. One, they're charisma characters, and get good access to dialogue skills, which gives them a whole other dimension that your party might otherwise be missing, and a sort of secret benefit to a paladin being your charisma character is that they are a tank and a melee character, and so if you run into encounters first with them, then they'll start fights after the dialogue starts in front, which is a minor advantage that actually adds up a lot over the course of a playthrough. Paladins giving you charisma access, of course, much like bards, gives you access to a lot of additional power and a lot of additional utility throughout your playthrough. They're just good skill access, because the dialogue skills are really important to have somewhere in your party, and getting them on a damage dealer is an unusual feature that Paladins have. They also get defensive auras, which are incredibly strong and make your whole party much more resilient if you are standing together. Now, in Honor mode, you won't always want to be standing together because the enemies will use AoE spells, but against enemies that you can stand together against, the auras are going to be really good. And of course, the auras always affect the Paladins themselves, making them much more resilient to enemy damage, and meaning that while they're executing their otherwise quite linear strategy, you can mess up with your Paladin in a way that you just cannot afford to with your Monk, because your Paladin has really good saves, great HP, great AC, and so on. On the other hand, Paladins are even more multi-attribute dependent than a Monk, requiring 5 of the 6 attributes to be high, so they're even greedier for stat items and are going to conflict with your other party members for needing the stat items. They also have pretty stringent item requirements, because things that give critical hits have to go to the Paladin, your best melee weapon has to go to the Paladin, and so on. And so they are going to be a little greedier for party resources than most other characters. Speaking of greedy for party resources, Paladins are also probably the most long rest dependent character in the game, because they burn through those spell slots in order to make those smite attacks, and they don't even get that many spell slots, especially as a monoclassed Paladin, and so you are going to be long resting way more often if you have a Paladin in your party than you would with a different party setup. So that does decrease the overall sustainability of your party significantly. On the other hand, the fact that Paladins' main strategy is so strong, and they have backups, have a backup strategy, they are built basically only one way, although you can build a dex-based Paladin. Check out my build, The Safest Character in Baldur's Gate 3, for one of those, if you are interested in seeing how that works, to try to mitigate some of the multi-attribute dependency. But overall, Paladins do one of the best things in the game, the best in the game. They just do the most damage in large bursts of any character, because if you can guarantee a critical hit on a smite attack, that's basically the highest amount of single turn damage that you will have access to without using a very high level spell, and even then it will often exceed it. And they can do that several times while also just outputting good damage turn after turn after turn. They protect your party. They have good healing, because Lay on Hands is actually one of the best out-of-combat sources of healing in the game, as well as one of the better in-combat sources of healing, because it can be a pretty significant burst heal if that's something that you need. And so Paladins, I think, are an A-tier character. They miss out on S-tier because there is only one way to build them. They are just melee damage dealers, pure and simple, and they are greedy for party resources, so they will only fit into a party that is built around supporting the Paladin. But if you build that party around supporting the Paladin, they are going to be incredible, and of course are going to help you cruise to victory in Honor Mode. Ranger. Ranger has two possible ways to build it, either as a melee character or as an archer. But the archer method is typically much more powerful in terms of the strategy than the melee version. There just isn't as much support for melee weapons for a ranger as there is for ranged weapons, because the ranged version of ranger gets access to archery fighting style. Archery fighting style is incredibly powerful because +2 to hit is a massive boost to your average damage, and it combines extremely well with the feat that every ranged character wants to take, Sharpshooter, mitigating the hit chance penalty of Sharpshooter enormously. Combine Sharpshooter with Ranger's ability to gain multiple attacks, either at later levels, depending on what subclass you're at, or at level 3 with Gloomstalker Ranger, and you have a character that does lots of ranged damage right out of the box. Ranger also gets really good skill access in terms of important skills, gaining Perception and Stealth, both of which are really important to have somewhere in the party, and gives you the Stealth Archer playstyle, which is incredibly powerful. Even if you're not abusing greater invisibility plus stealth, the Stealth Archer playstyle is just ridiculously strong. Being able to shoot enemies to start fights and gain surprise is incredibly powerful. Being able to remain hidden to gain advantage on your attacks is incredibly powerful. And so those additional options give you a lot of additional power for your character and mean that you'll be outputting tons of extremely reliable damage, and you also won't really be competing for items with your other characters, because presumably you only have one archer in your party, and so only the archer needs the bow. And archers are otherwise quite item independent in this game, because all they really need is a good bow in order to shine. Rangers also get a bunch of elemental resistances through their Natural Explorer features, which makes them deceptively tanky. With their good HP gain and medium armor and shield proficiency, remember you can have a shield equipped while you have a bow equipped, as well as having elemental resistances, your ranger will often be one of the most difficult characters in your party to kill, because they're going to be far away from the combat, they have good stealth checks if they need to stealth and run away, and they start far away. They have access to Longstrider from their spell list, giving them additional mobility as well as enhanced leap, and they are relatively tanky, meaning that for an honor mode run, a ranger is an extremely safe character to have in your party. Now, what do rangers not do? Well, they don't do quite as much damage as melee characters, but that's okay because they're ranged. So the damage is going to be applied to the right target every time, and without putting the ranger at risk. So it would be a problem if it was as much damage as, say, a paladin was doing. But they are actually very close in terms of a paladin. And as you level up, they don't get a lot in terms of levels past in terms of boosts past level 5. So a monoclass ranger does have a few dead levels in the middle up until they get their level 11 capstones, which are incredibly powerful. In Baldur's Gate, they added these level 11 capstones for the ranger subclasses, which are incredibly strong and will bring your ranger right back up to par with your other characters. That said, there is a small dead zone in between like level 5 and 8 or so, where your ranger is not as impactful as another class would be, as like a paladin or fighter would be, another martial character. And that definitely has to count against them, because that is one of the more dangerous parts of the game, is sort of throughout Act 2. But overall, I don't think that that's a huge penalty, because the inherent strategy of a ranger of just staying safe and shooting things for massive damage every turn is so powerful, and they are very, very good at executing that strategy. Rangers also add a bunch of extra utility, especially from some of the subclasses. Beastmaster Rangers have a whole suite of utility that they bring to the table as well, but even just having Spike Growth and Longstrider and Enhanced Leap and Goodberry on one character, and not having to bring those spells on one of your spellcasters opens up a bunch of extra utility for your party. Rangers have a very strong linear strategy. They only do one thing, but they do that thing extremely well, and that thing is a good thing to do. Ranged damage is a very powerful thing to do, and they do it also without interfering with what the rest of your party is trying to do, which is something that I'm looking here for. Kind of that's turned out to be the differentiator between classes in A and B, is do they interfere with the rest of what your party's trying to do in some way by sort of demanding resources from them. Rangers basically don't, but they also use resources extremely well. Even with only one extra attack, haste on a ranger is really good, bless on a ranger is really good, potions and stuff do really well for your ranger. So I think overall, Ranger's ability to just output consistent damage very safely, cost your party almost nothing, puts them right into A tier alongside the other very reliable characters like very reliable martial characters like Fighter and Paladin. Rogues. Rogues bring two things to the table. One, they give you very good skill access and get expertise at level 1, meaning that you're going to have some of the best skills available in the game right from the beginning of the game. And two, they do sneak attack damage. Sneak attack allows you to add a whole bunch of damage to your attack once per round, increasing the giving you a bunch of burst damage at the beginning of a fight. When combined with stealth, you can gain advantage and gain guaranteed critical hits, potentially with assassin. This lets you do a very high amount of burst damage with a single attack every turn, but in exchange for that, you can only do it once per turn, and so your damage on Rogue is somewhat capped by the once per turn restriction on sneak attack, and by the fact that you only get one attack per turn, because unlike the other martial characters, Rogue never gets extra attack. This means that you will often be using an offhand dagger to try to guarantee landing your other sneak attack or using two hand crossbows to try to make sure that you land it, because if you miss with your one attack per round and don't get your sneak attack damage, it's incredibly punishing. That means that rogues are fairly constrained in terms of how they're built, because they either need to be built for very, very high accuracy to land their sneak attack, or to use two weapons, which means that they are stuck with somewhat subpar weapons, because the weapons that you can dual wield are typically less powerful than the weapons that you use in one hand. And so that puts a constraint on what rogues can do. They also can't really do anything else. Other than good skill access and the amount of damage and outputting damage, rogues don't really do anything. They've got good mobility similar to monks, but without similar to monks, they have like multiple actions per turn that they can use to move, with cunning action, dash and disengage and hide, and that is very useful. But if you aren't doing enough damage when you get there to justify moving, then those things just don't really give you a whole lot. Rogues also suffer, I think, more than any other character from the monoclass restriction that we're using for this video, because rogues basically don't get anything after level 3. Almost all of the power budget in rogues is spent on their level 1 skill expertise and on their subclass abilities, which are really, really powerful. Thief and Assassin have incredibly strong abilities at level 3, but after that they're getting a d6 of sneak attack every 2 levels, and a couple minor defensive abilities that you don't want to use because of your very low hit points. The d6 of sneak attack is just not enough damage to keep up with other characters' damage, and so your rogue is going to be doing less and less damage relative to the rest of your party over the course of the game, and they already started out doing less, so rogues are really going to suffer starting at level 5, and it kind of only gets worse from there. Overall, I think that rogues are the character that has suffered the most, both from being restricted to a monoclass here, but also in the transition to Baldur's Gate 3 from tabletop, because a lot of what rogues get in tabletop is sort of things that just don't happen in Baldur's Gate. Like, for example, the ability to speak Thieves' Cant, which is a secret language known only to rogues, is something that you can get in tabletop. Or the ability to forge a document, or quickly verify the value of a painting. Those are all features that are available to rogues in tabletop, depending on their background selection and certain other things that obviously don't happen in Baldur's Gate, and so they just aren't able to do the things that you would want them to do in a campaign. Rogues, like Rangers, do get to be some of the most single attribute dependent or sad characters in the game, because they only need dexterity and constitution. They don't really have and a little bit of wisdom for saving throws. They don't have any use for the other attributes. And that does mean that you can put points in like charisma or something like that, or intelligence, and have them roll those skill checks, but I just don't think that's enough to make up for the fact that they are a damage dealing class that just does not do as much damage as the other damage dealing classes. Rogues, similar to monks, are squishy and vulnerable, and require a lot of resources from your party to make them work, and the payoff just isn't really there. Not that the rogues are not that a rogue is bad, and you can certainly win honor mode with a monoclass rogue, but they are going to suffer more from taking... your party is going to have a harder time from taking a monoclass rogue than any other character, because it demands a lot of resources and just does not give you enough damage in return to justify its slot as a damage dealer, so rogue is going in C tier. Sorcerer. So Sorcerer is all about the sorcery points. They get a bunch of the best spells in the game, and they can use them multiple times per turn through Twin Spell and Quicken Spell. That is an incredibly powerful effect, and gives you some of the most broken options in the game, even by default, without doing any work for them. Sorcerer, I think if you put no effort into optimizing your characters, like if you just sort of build things that kind of make sense and don't use specific items or follow a build guide or whatever, is the character that's most likely to be broken by accident. It's the character that's most likely to just be way over power scale completely by accident, because Twin Spell, which you'll probably take, and Quicken Spell, that you'll probably take even if you're just like investigating the system for the first time, are just so good, and they let sorcerers do things that you really should not be able to. Sorcerers, in fact, can't do those things in tabletop, because in tabletop you can't cast multiple leveled spells in the same turn. So Quicken Spell will allow you to use a cantrip and another spell, or another action and a Quicken Spell, but not two fireballs or haste and a fireball or whatever. Baldur's Gate got rid of that restriction, meaning that sorcerers can basically take 2 turns for every other character's 1 turn. Obviously, at base, that's an incredibly powerful effect, and those turns are also really good. Sorcerers have some of the best spells in the game. Many of the S tier spells that I mentioned in my spells tier list are sorcerer's spells, and they get great access to those spells. They're also a charisma based character, so much like bards and paladins, they fill that role in your party, meaning that they get you all of the dialogue skills while also being this incredibly powerful character in terms of their just sheer effect on the game. Sorcerer subclasses are all really strong. Sorcerer defensive capabilities are really good, with Counterspell and Shield both being options. They also get some of the most broken items in the game. If you want them, they can abuse the wet condition very easily, which again is one of the more powerful mechanics in Baldur's Gate. But even absent abusing specific items, looking at specifically out-of-scale mechanics like wet, sorcerers are just by default so nonsensically strong, because taking 2 turns when every other character is taking 1 turn is so good. The fact that you can also cast haste on another spellcaster and they can cast 2 spells, you can twin haste and get multiple actions, you can twin haste and get sanctuary from an ally and concentrate on it safely, and of course you can also just do all of the other at base really powerful things, like putting up a powerful concentration spell and then quickening just a damage dealing spell, and you just get all of the abilities that other spellcasters get, only more times per turn. When you've got a sorcerer in your party, it's sort of like you have 2 of another spellcaster in your party. And spellcasters are at base already extremely versatile, able to fill a whole bunch of roles. You can be a controller or a damage dealer or a support using haste and so on. And you can do all of those things all at once because you can quicken your spells and cast them multiple times per turn. Sorcerers really don't need any other mechanic other than quicken and twin spell and just the ability to cast spells in order to be declared an S tier character. And so I think I'm just going to leave it there. They get multiple actions per turn where every other character is stuck with 1. Those actions are some of the most powerful in the game. S tier character, of course. Warlocks. Warlocks bring, I guess, 4 unique things to the table. 1, they get access to Eldritch Blast and Agonizing Blast, meaning that they do really solid, consistent, ranged damage. In fact, a Warlock is kind of the baseline for a damage dealer in Dungeons & Dragons and in Baldur's Gate. A Warlock casting Eldritch Blast with the Agonizing Blast invocation and Hex up should be your basic baseline for how much damage a character should deal. A character that is doing more damage than that is a good damage dealer. A character that's doing less damage than that is probably too weak, and you need to revisit your build if you aren't doing that 1d10 plus charisma plus 1d6 damage with your attacks. Warlocks are the baseline, the standard for damage dealing. In addition to that, they also get a bunch of really solid control spells, as well as some lackluster damage spells. But the control spells are what we're really here for, because you already have great damage just from your Eldritch Blasts. Their control spells are also, of course, cast with Warlock spell slots, meaning that unlike other spellcasters, they are short rest dependent rather than long rest dependent. As opposed to other spellcasters who can cast their highest level spells only once per day, Warlocks can cast their highest level spells 6 times per day, every time they short rest, or twice every time they short rest, but in exchange they're limited to only using 2 spells per combat, basically. And if you run out of short rests, you run out of spells much fast, so the length of your adventuring day is often shorter than other spellcasters, even if you are using higher level spells in every combat. What that means in practice is that most Warlocks are going to go into a combat and cast one very powerful control spell, following it up by a whole bunch of Eldritch Blasts, and then saving their second spell for a defensive option like Darkness, Misty Step, or something like that. So usually what your Warlock is going to bring to the table is Hunger of Hadar plus Eldritch Blast. Luckily, Hunger of Hadar plus Eldritch Blast is a really good thing to bring to the table. Hunger of Hadar is one of the most powerful effects in the game, just an incredibly strong spell. I talked about it extensively in my spell tier list, so if you want to know more about that, then definitely go check that out. But basically, as the only thing that the class does, Hunger of Hadar plus Eldritch Blast is a darn good thing to do, and Warlock gives you more than that. For one, it's a charisma character, which is going to get you points always, because charisma characters getting access to dialogue skills is really good. For a second, you get access to a bunch of the really good control spells in the game, which is very powerful, as well as a bunch of the other really strong defensive spells in the game, like Misty Step and Counterspell, which you can use very regularly. And for another, you have access at base to one of the core most powerful combos in the game, one of the most powerful strategies in the game, Darkness plus Devil's Sight, which makes you completely immune to ranged attacks, gives you advantage on all your attacks, and gives all enemies disadvantage on attacks, all melee enemies disadvantage on attacks against you, unless they also have a similar ability to see through magical darkness. That by itself is an incredibly powerful effect, and one that makes Warlocks very strong. What Warlocks won't be doing is as much damage as other damage dealers, or as powerful as consistent of control effects as other controlling characters. You basically get your 1 control spell per fight, and then your 1 defensive spell per fight. Maybe you can use a second control spell if you lose concentration or they all move out of it, but you're not going to easily be able to diversify your strategy within fights, because you are limited to the Warlock spells that you have learned, and you just won't have as many spells learned or as many spells to cast as other characters will. A Cleric can swap things up, maybe the Tempest Cleric is casting Sleet Storm, and then they need Command, and then they need Spiritual Weapon to block a doorway, and so on. Warlocks don't have the option to continue to do that in longer fights. You've got your control spell, and you've got your damage dealing effects, but those are very good things. In combination with the fact that Warlocks also are a charisma character, so you can use them as a party face, that gives them a lot of additional options, but it does mean that Warlocks are stuck doing kind of one thing. They're a damage dealer that doesn't do as much damage as really dedicated damage dealers, and a controller that doesn't do as much control as really dedicated controllers. Overall, I think that I would put them in A tier, but I think that of these characters, they are probably on the lower end of A tier, and you could probably drop them to B tier. I wouldn't be upset, at least by the criteria that I have. But the fact is that they are still pretty versatile, even though they're only going to be doing one thing in most fights, because you can take a bunch of the other control spells, and if they're better than Hunger of Hadar, you can still cast them. And in general, most spellcasters are going to play out as cast your best concentration spell and then just do other random stuff for the rest of the fight anyways. So the fact that Warlocks have that play pattern baked into them isn't as much a downside as you might think, because that's the intended play pattern for most spellcasters. In general, and one reason that this tier list has somewhat favored spellcasters, casters bring versatility to your party, and marshals bring raw power. Warlocks, and how they bring versatility is by casting the perfect concentration spell for the fight, typically. So usually you will say, I need haste for this fight, so that's what I'm going to concentrate on, and then we'll use my damage dealing spells for the rest of the fight. Or you'll say, I need hypnotic pattern for this fight, so that's what I'll concentrate on, then I'll use damage dealing spells for the rest of the fight. Warlocks have that play pattern baked in, which means they're required to do it, basically, because they only get 2 spells per fight, but that play pattern is what most of your spellcasters are going to be doing anyways. And Hunger of Hadar is almost always the best spell for the fight, so it doesn't matter that you don't have access to as many different spells as other spellcasters, because you've got a really, really good one. Wizards. Wizards are one of the hardest classes to rate. In fact, probably the hardest, I think, here, because I think that Wizard as a class has the most variance in terms of power level between the different subclasses of Wizard. Is one of the characters that changes the most depending on what subclass you select, and there are 8 different Wizard subclasses, the most in the game, meaning that there's a lot of different options for how you are going to build your Wizard, and how that's going to impact your play. However, on average, the Wizard subclasses are incredible. Some of them are very, very powerful, and typically you're going to tend towards the best subclasses anyways, so I will be evaluating them with the weaker subclasses bringing things down just a little bit, but on the whole we'll be evaluating as though you're selecting some of the best Wizard subclasses usually selecting the best Wizard subclasses. Wizard gives you access to the most possible spells in the game because you can scribe every scroll that you find into your Wizard spellbook, including some scrolls that aren't normally on the Wizard spell list, which I'm still not entirely sure if that's a bug, but you can scribe scrolls of Cleric spells as well sometimes, which is a little bit odd, but possible, giving you access to a million different spells, and so you will basically always have the right spell for the situation. Wizards also get Arcane Recovery, so like Sorcerers, they have a mechanic that lets them cast a few more spells per day, giving them a little extra adventuring longevity. And altogether, your Wizard is going to be probably the most versatile character in the game because of their very wide spell access. However, in terms of raw power level, they are a little bit lower on the scale than some of the other spellcasters because they don't have a Sorcerer's ability to spam out multiple spells per turn, and they don't have command, basically, from clerics, so they're missing some of the core spells, but they do have other core spells like Counterspell, and all of the powerful control spells, as well as the access to the secret spells, which in a monoclassed environment, only Wizards can get those secret spells, and they are incredibly powerful. In particular, the Art of Strategy spell is ridiculously strong. Check my spell tier list for more on that. Basically, the question that we're asking for Wizards is how good is the Wizard spell list, because that's what they are about. And if you go and check my spells tier list, you will see that Wizard spells score very well. At every level of the game, there are excellent spells that Wizards can cast. They will often have a game-winning spell available, and typically what you want from your spellcasters is to provide versatility while your martial characters supply raw power to your party. Basically, you want to have the best spell for the encounter, and Wizards are very, very likely to have the best spell for the encounter because of how many spells they have. They also get great access to summons with some of the better summons in the game, and Animate Dead and Conjure Elemental, meaning that they have access to one of the more powerful strategies in the game through that metric as well. And, of course, additional bonuses if you're a Necromancer Wizard. They have access to some of the more powerful offensive and defensive mechanics through Divination Wizard, or just the most powerful defensive mechanic in the game through Abjuration Wizard. I'll talk about all of those when we get to the Wizard subclasses later on, but in general, the Wizard spell list is so good that the fact that Wizards are squishy and don't do anything other than cast spells, doesn't matter, because casting spells lets you do a lot of different things. Wizards also probably won't be competing that much with the rest of your party for items, although of course different robes and spell DC items will often be good on multiple party members, and they don't provide any relevant skill access at all, basically, so you don't get anything from that. You do have to build your party around supporting a wizard, because you need to have the important skills elsewhere in your party. You need to have somebody to stand in front of the wizard and so on. So they're not as easy to slot into a party as some of these other characters, but the sheer versatility of the character in play, being able to solve encounters by having the best spell available at any time, makes them solidly A tier in my opinion. Alright, my friends, this has been my look at the classes in Baldur's Gate, and have been rating them according to their power as monoclasses. Remember that this is for single-class characters with 12 levels of this class, and also bear in mind that the margins between these tiers are very thin. The difference between S and A and B tier are not big, and so these classes are all very powerful and very viable, and I definitely encourage you to play whatever party you want. Any party comp, I believe, can be successful with good play. Just some of these classes fit a little more easily into a variety of parties than others. In fact, I think that the only real difference between the S and A tier characters, for the most part, is that the S tier characters can go in just about any party, whereas the A tier characters have a slightly more constrained role. But overall, all of the classes are really good, and I think that speaks to the very solid design behind 5th edition D&D and the solid balancing that they put in terms of making every party viable. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and of course, as always, feel free to leave me feedback if you think there's something that I should move around, and leave a comment on the video. Hit like, because that helps a ton with the algorithm, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And you can subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game content. I'll be back with the subclasses and with multi-classes soon. Cheers, my friends. Catch you next time.